Well, Lawrence, just like an electric vehicle, we're off and rolling. Half the time, there's no sound. But as I've brought up this conversation many times before, if we had Métis carts that were electric, and nobody's come up to us yet to tell us that they've invented those. So I know that because we've had this conversation on our podcast before, it's just a matter of time before the electric Métis cart kicks off, and you and I just rolling in the dough.
Well, I think I'd just hop in my truck and go around. I don't know about me.
Well, it'd probably get us there faster. So welcome, folks, to the Squeaky Wheel. Thanks to Lawrence and I for always jumping on. Thanks, Leighton, behind the scenes. Always fun, again, Lawrence, to have a conversation. And, folks, before I get too far into this, I just want to say our best wishes and thoughts to the families of the people of Ukraine, to all of the families within the nations around the Ukraine who are facing just as many challenges with trying to find space to put everybody when it comes to they're looking for a safe space to protect their families and all of the families here. And something that I think is really important now to have a conversation about, and that I'm starting to read a little bit, Lawrence, is a lot of anger towards the Russian people. And I think we have to be very conscious of the fact that there's just as many people who are from Russian communities, Russian descent, who are against the war. Yeah. So before, people go around and, displays of hatred or violence or if graffiti or damaging historic sort of Russian property, we need to be very aware that how the relationships between nations are occurring are sometimes economics, and they are not necessarily the people themselves, right? There are a lot of innocent people. So I just think it's important. And, we talk every week about how the integration of the Métis community into the Indigenous population and the recognition, these are still conversations that are happening within the Ukrainian, within the Russian population. I think there's just as many people who don't want war and enough Russian people who are saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I had a chance to be in Russia at one point, and I kind of see, it was just after the breakup, and I kind of seen, what was happening there and where they are today. But, this was planned for probably about 14 years that Putin was talking about Ukraine.
Sure.
Coming back, right? And certainly with the way he is now and noticing that U.S. forces were around his border, felt the need to move into Ukraine now.
Well, the conversation about NATO, and that is one of those, I think I'm starting to get a bit more understanding of the nations that create these sort of relationships, North American Treaty Organization, in the sense of the awareness of democracy and how that, these shared values. Well, there are people out there who don't have some of those shared values. And just like what happens when it comes to change in the West, there's just as many people out in the Western provinces saying, well, we should separate. Well, there's people in the Ukraine who are probably saying, well, we should separate from the Ukraine because, I respected this type of political infrastructure more than the one here. So there's always going to be a bit of separatism that happens. But when it's happening over there and there's war associated with it, and here it just ends up being sort of more of a war of words or these convoys or people, if you're peacefully protesting and you're trying to express your concerns, be involved, but listen to both sides.
Well, I mean, understanding the separatism of the West, I mean, we just have to look at good old Louis here.
Right.
And what he tried to do, right? As soon as that went on Andre Naut's property and Canada showed up and they started surveying, and he stepped on the surveyor's chain and said, Canada has no legal, or it cannot be in this territory legally, and challenged Canada, right? And he did for many, many years, obviously, for about 15 of them. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's, take into context of what legal right, when they have here, they do, actually. And the problem with the West is that we're just never heard in Parliament because there's no seats that represent us here.
Right.
That are equal to what's happening in the East. So that's, basically a reform idea for Parliament, if that's how you want to challenge it. But that's the only possible way that you can actually see yourself being represented here in the West, is changing that parliament structure.
Right. And us, the citizenship, bringing a representative to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when Canada was making their agreements with the Métis, I mean, we all know about certainly the Manitoba, the land claim that they did, and they won. Certainly for those millions of acres that were promised to the Métis children, there was also 4 seats in Parliament for the Métis that were never actually
really
complete as part of that Manitoba Act, right?
Oh.
So we have all this knowledge, but Canada certainly moved in, and then they made the rule, and they made their own legislative example out of Louis Riel, because at that time he got exiled. They just stripped everything away.
Yeah, they made an example.
Yeah,
right. And I think we still have a duty, and the government still has a larger duty to say that we took something away that really was never ours.
Yeah, that's right. And also, what he was negotiating was representation for the West, right? But when that rebellion happened, then all that went down towards there. And I don't think we'll ever get to that table again, the Western provinces, like what he was negotiating, right? So that's basically it. I mean, we live by Canada law right now.
Right. And, as much as we have the conversation, we're positive forward, we're creating that recognition. We're creating the awareness that the challenges that had occurred historically, we need to continue to consider and now figure out a way to ensure that the Métis people within the Indigenous framework are listened to, are their considerations, and we continue to explore land that was taken away, and how do we, apply to allow our families to continue to share in land that was lost.
And also, the trucker convoy, certainly a few of the leaders there saying they're Indigenous, might actually hurt the Indigenous communities. And they probably don't realize that claiming you're Métis and you have no veritable proof that you are, yet you represent this convoy that's trying to protest, then you will certainly, us as Métis people certainly won't get on the cause if that is the case.
Well, and I guess that's one of the reasons why I no longer tell people that I was Lawrence's backup ballet dancer, because there's really no proof. Even considering the way I walk, nobody would suggest that I was your understudy.
Right.
So I've stopped trying to utilize that when I go into meetings and in conversations. Well, what do you do, Ross? Well, I understudy for Lawrence's historic ballet career.
No, I wasn't. I would say I would. At that level where I had understudies.
You're all over the world, though.
I was probably the understudy myself.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
But, actually, there was recently a ballerina who was retiring. I think it was 32 years.
Yeah. Was it Sonia Rodriguez? No.
Oh.
Maybe.
That might be. Yeah, it was just the longevity.
Yeah.
For that many years.
Yeah. Well, Karen Kane is probably that example where she danced until she was 46 or something crazy like that.
Let's think about this.
Gets in the company when she's 18, and then 46 is when she leaves.
We're well into the 70s of our podcasts, and somehow Leighton manages to keep bringing us here every week in order to have conversation. But we've only been at this for a couple years. How, folks? Lawrence right now is still wearing a $1,000 power suit and brilliant blue shirts and his almost exclaimed beautiful glasses. I'm just barely holding it together with held together tailored stuff. The in 30 more years, Lawrence, how are we going to look when I'm looking across? Because that's what it would take to get to the 32 years.
Well, I think for you probably look at Don Cherry in his 20s and go all the way up to he's in his 60s.
So you're suggesting that my suits are even going to become more flamboyant?
Yeah, I think so.
Or high collared. I think eventually the collars are going to be about 8 inches high of
I prefer the dark formal stuff.
Yeah. The very political sort of look.
This episode brought to you by the Métis Nation of Alberta, with a vision of a strong Métis Nation embracing Métis rights, and a mission to pursue the advancement of the socioeconomic and cultural well-being of the Métis people of Alberta. For more information, go to www.albertamétis.com. Now, back to the show.
Lawrence, now we were chatting a little earlier, and I honestly almost am embarrassed because you're setting me up with, I'm going to throw the word out there and you bring us back into the conversation. I'm probably going to say it wrong, folks. Rougarou?
Oh, yeah, you're not supposed to mention Rougarou.
Oh, I'm not supposed to mention Rougarou?
No, it's like the Scottish play, and I can't say Macbeth, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Why? What are we having a conversation about?
Well, Rougarou is folklore, right? So when you instilled fear into the Métis community in the old days, it was always about folklore.
So, okay, take me through this. Here we are sitting outside the trapper's tent. And, we've sat around inside Métis cabins before.
Yeah.
And it's, 75 years ago. We're sitting around each holding our parfleche of pemmican.
Yeah.
Where does Rougarou play into this?
Well, Rougarou was a half man, half wolf. Some people say half horse.
Oh.
And certainly would come and take your soul and skin you alive and those sort of things. And if you got lost in the woods. And
really?
Oh, yeah. And then, there's Wendigo, which is also like a cannibalistic monster that's in the woods. There's peacocks that you would tell your kids that he would kidnap you as a child, Métis child, and drag you in the woods and stuff.
Now they could just say that about the government.
But that's if you're misbehaving, yeah. So
right.
If you're misbehaving, and we would threaten peacocks on you, right? So,
well, folks, if any of them show up here, it's likely because of something that I've done. But how have we never had this conversation before? Like I've never come across that. I guess the folklore makes sense.
Well, last week we talked about the medicines, but we had the folklore too, which is a part of this new thing, and you can get this in this book too. Yeah,
folks. Last week we were talking about the Métis Legacy 2, the Lawrence Barkwell book that comes from the Gabriel Dumont Institute, and in there is such a cherished awareness of, as you pointed out, the history. That's not just sort of being, here's the government throwing this out. This is from the Métis community building this book. And I am going to have to go through this a little bit closer to figure out a bit more about our folklore. What's funny, and I imagine these must have been Michif stories.
Well, no, actually we shared them with the Cree and all the First Nations too, but we definitely listened to their stories.
And so much of our history was passed down from generation to generation from knowledge keepers and the elders telling these stories. Now I'm almost a little bit nervous that I got to start looking over my shoulder for a Rougarou.
Well, one thing that you can't do is when you mention it and tell the story of it, you have to go smudge and get all the evil away from you.
So there's a smudge coming up in our future. But folks, yes, this is the book again that we were talking about last week, and it's absolutely fabulous. But Lawrence, now I also, sorry about that. I also want to talk about the Rupert's Land books that have just shown up.
Yeah, so these are foundational knowledge themes that Rupert's Land is giving out, and they're certainly different topics. We got languages, the Métis, homeland history. That's just a vocab list. And Métis in Alberta, Métis culture and traditions, and Métis Nation governance. So,
how many pictures of you are in there?
0 that I've noticed so far.
So I'll scroll through it kind of quickly, but the. So this is now, would this be considered sort of a bit of Alberta's encyclopedia?
I think it's the newest coming from the Métis community of history and all those good things. And this package, of course, is at Rupert's Land Institute, the Métis Center of Excellence. And it's very nice to actually get this whole series. So definitely a lot of good reading for me. But I would say I probably know 60% of the stuff.
Yeah.
So
60% of the time, Lawrence knows everything.
That's right.
Every time, yeah.
And for the other 40%, if I don't know the answer, I don't say anything.
No, and
I don't make things up.
That's the important part.
Yeah.
Because now, of course, folks, I got to look up Rougarou, but then I also got to do a smudge afterwards in order to try and, clean a little bit of this area. The one of the things that I wanted to jump on that's coming up here is your conversation with the MNC president, Cassidy Caron. She stepped into some ugly boots to fill with, it seemed that there was a lot of
with the statement of claim
that was happening as soon as she took over, and that could be years, right? But as these things take for a statement of claim, but in the meantime, here she is trying to bring the nation together of shared connection gathering within the Métis community.
Well, it's just an example of what you might inherit. Like, you know, if I go to a different office, I might inherit, you know, that stuff. And
me, for example.
Yeah. So if I go to your office, there might be some I'm like, whoa, Ross did this, and I got to deal with this.
Oh,
right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
So I mean, it's a lot of that. I think a lot of the old, and you know, she's the new leader, right? So once she gets this off the table and moving forward and moving the nation to where it's supposed to be, because now she has provinces in her realm. Not that she oversees them, because really they're secretariat, but certainly are going into self-government. So the nation is actually changing quite rapidly around her, right? So, you know, we give her as much support as possible.
Well, and again, that's the role. It's not necessarily for her to know everything, but to start putting a team together to build some guidance as to how we're going to move forward as a nation, or bring the provinces together to move forward.
Yeah, well, the Board of Governors are the presidents from each province, so they go to.
And Audrey's been on that for a long time.
That's right, and they work with each other, and including the Métis National Council president. And of course, she sits in Ottawa and does a lot of the negotiations there for the rest of the country. So, yeah.
Well, I look forward to hearing a little bit more about how all the conversations go.
But the meeting with her is about Forward Summit, so that conference is coming up in May. I've been co-chairing that thing for 3 years.
3 years. Yeah.
It was only supposed to be a one-time event.
One time, 2 days.
COVID, I've been there for a long time now. So
you're like the Workforce Forward Summit celebrity.
Yeah, well, I've been on their website for how long now,
yeah.
so I think it's great.
You're the Ruggaroo of the workforce, because you've been around so long, people are looking over their shoulder to see where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is going to be a great conference that's bringing together, again, the industry, the recognition, the awareness, working with Aboriginal agencies, trying to combine that. And I know that's been happening for a number of years, and there's a lot of spin-offs for businesses in order to try and connect within the Indigenous community.
Yeah, that's right. So a CCAB and the Connect Group are kind of the ones that are hosting the event.
Right.
I'm just the face to it. And
well, they reach out to me quite a bit. It's always one of those, hey, do you want to sit on this? Do you want to talk about that? Or are you interested in presenting? And, you know, I'd like to see them do a little bit more of, they are starting to get the names out there, but I think they're challenged just as hard with all of a sudden, okay, is this going to be in person now? Is this going to be virtual? Yeah. You know, does Ross want to sit on this one? Does it make sense? And is this one? Yeah, I can only imagine how hard it is.
Oh, for sure. It's hard for them to coordinate it, especially during COVID, because they host very large conferences, right? And they're not small.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And so speaking of things that are also up and coming, and you know, we like to share a conversation about all over Canada. I was just reading recently, and I actually hadn't come across it, but there's another podcast, and I think it's a smaller one coming out of BC. The gentleman's name is Darian Kovacs, and he's the host of the Métis Speaker Series. So big shout out to him. I haven't had a chance. I was just reading about him, and I wanted to just throw it out there so that people can have a listen and find out for their own interest. But he was unearthing, as much as we always have this conversation, same for him, unearthing his identity through the creation of the podcast. His father was a refugee from Hungary, but they didn't know much about the mother's history and the maternal until the maternal grandfather had passed away, and then started to become more aware during this eulogy that they discovered that there was a Métis history. Mm-hmm. And I think as he continues, the same as the journey for where for me, bringing forward conversation and learning about my father's history and that family awareness, they've put something together where they bring in guests to talk about that same awareness.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I'm actually scheduled in as a guest.
What, Lawrence?
On this podcast.
Why have I just hearing about this right now?
I don't know. I think I probably told you, but it just went over your head.
Yes, as usual, whenever you say something, folks, you can't see it here on the show, but whenever Lawrence says something, I turn around and spin in a complete circle and just pretend like it never happened.
He's Métis professional in marketing in Vancouver, and they want to speak to me about the nation and definitely bring a perspective in. So
now you're going to tell them the same story about the journey of your dad and how my dad had met, and a bunch of old musicians, and even how you and I came to become more aware of.
No, it's
all you're not going to
bring me.
Okay.
And no, my dad.
Okay.
My dad had his chance in the limelight, and No, just kidding.
Yeah.
I'll talk about my journey as a young Métis man leaving Prince George, British Columbia, and Lumbertown to, where I am today. And
I mean, you essentially took a bus to Calgary, got off, walked over to the School of Ballet, and said, "I'm here."
Yeah.
Yeah, like that. Now, you'd obviously done a lot of training.
I think it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. But the smartest one, right? Because, I walked up, had one-way ticket here, walked up the stairs to the Nat Christie and said to the receptionist, "Is there an audition that's available? Is there a day that I can come in?" And I remember the look on her face, like, "Who are you?" So then she went and talked to the director, and he came out and met me and said, "Yeah, come into the company class tomorrow. We'll check you."
Now, how tight were your pants when you showed up?
I have no idea.
Okay, you can't remember that far back.
Yeah.
But see, that's a fun message to share. I recently did a conversation, I think, for Bow Valley College, where I was, I thought I'll probably talk for 5 minutes. I'll talk about leadership. Well, in the end, it was probably 20 minutes where I talked leadership, awareness, this, as I'm going through cultural awareness, and then acceptance, because that's still that part of your journey that you are, it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
The awareness happens. And how does it relate to my connections with family, with friends, my awareness within the community? How do I share something respectfully as I continue to learn, and also learn that I'm going to make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
We tease each other quite a bit on the show because it's fun for me to try and say a word that I've never seen. That's a Michif word, and you've probably heard it at lots of meetings, lots of presentations, and I've never heard. So when I get to say that word and I make the mistake, I learn just as much from it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We're always learning, and that's the thing. Sometimes we take these naive steps, but then they work in your favor, and that's a good way of putting it. They're just naive, and you go ahead in anyways, and then it all works out.
Well, yeah, you're trying to learn. It's not that you're trying to make a mistake, but as you learn from this didn't work out, let's try and find something more positive. I don't know if by next week that I'll be going down to the Alberta Ballet. What I might do is pop in there and just say, "Here I am."
Yeah.
Just like my friend Lawrence did a whole bunch of years ago. Here I am, and see what they say.
Well, that's the thing. I had one-way ticket, didn't have a job, didn't have a place to live.
Yeah.
Just showed up.
I know what's going to happen is I'll hear the creak of the door as they push it closed and they start barricading it because there's no way they're letting me in.
Yeah,
not with my age, not with my Achilles, not with,
No, I'll send a word out to them when you're coming.
That I may be showing up.
Yeah.
So, Leighton, send the signal. It's just time. I want to have a little bit of a scam conversation. Now, this scam, Lawrence, is going back to some of the online scams. There's a gentleman, it's almost like I poke at the people in Ontario or people out east. But this is a very kind of common scam that they reach out and say, "Listen, we're going to pay you $500 to review products. We want you to become more aware and tell us, because as you give us information about what is, if this is a good product, it gets the awareness out there." So in his case, this was almost more of a cryptocurrency kind of scam where as he put some money in, they started sending him money back. So it's like a pyramid scheme. Hey, he pays $500. He does a little bit of work. He gets $1,000. Well, if you could give us a little bit more money, right? You're making 100% on your money. So yes, the next thing you know, he's putting in $50,000. He's putting in another 30. In the end, he'd put upwards of $260,000, thinking he's going to get 100% of his return back because it did work the first couple of times.
Yeah.
And then they never gave him any money back, right? So he ended up being out $260,000, which is essentially all the money he has to survive or look into the future. So folks, again, I cannot stress enough. If something is too good to be true, it probably is, right? To the idea that you're going to get that kind of return. And the more information you share with somebody, the more information they have to use against you. So Lawrence, I just need to borrow $20, and I promise by the end of the podcast, I'll give you 40. So
it sounds like the Tinder swindler.
Okay.
That's the way he operated.
Yeah. Is that what he was doing?
Yeah. He'd date these girls, meet them online, and he'd ask them for money.
So it's essentially the same thing.
Or my security team, I got to pay for them, and they closed all my accounts. Can you lend me a couple $100,000? Right?
Yeah.
and then it just accumulated.
Yeah, but people think they're getting an experience, or they're part of something bigger, and you get caught up in it. And I know what that's like. There's as much as I don't know what it's like on this scale. We all are aware that somebody's always kind of offering you something. It's like, is that too good to be true? Well, I've often found it is. Yeah. Some nice things that I was reading about was the Junos are creating 2 new categories for Indigenous artists.
Okay.
I don't know if one of them is podcasts.
Right.
I figured it was, you and I should hum or sing or try and say that we should get our own humming podcast category.
Yeah.
And try and see, maybe that's how I'm going to win a Juno.
No, I don't see that. But, I think it's important, actually. I think that's a great idea. We have all these sub sort of awards, you could say, that are around that, expose Indigenous artists, but not at that level. And I think that's very, very important to have.
Oh, yeah. Actually, you are highlighting the fact that we lack that recognition at that. There were Indigenous music awards, but yes, something should translate from that represents Canada. And I guess that's the one we're going to be hopefully finding out a little bit more about these Indigenous grants. There was a sad story that I was reading, not so much sad in the sense, but Canada's only training program for Indigenous pilots was it was an airport hangar now I'm going to make this one wrong for sure, Thayendaga in the Territory. Out east is always.
Thayendaga.
Okay, Thayendaga. They ended up, so they were training pilots for flying in and out of remote communities.
Right.
13 planes burned down, 40,000 square foot hangar. So a tremendous loss. Now, I don't think anybody was injured in it, but it's sad. Hopefully, we'll buy new planes. Hopefully, that's what insurance is for, and we can rebuild from there. But it's a positive story in the sense that I wasn't aware that we had these kind of training programs. So another one of those things, folks, that you should be looking into if this is something that interests you. And hopefully, we can get some more planes in there. I guess one of the other questions I have about community, Lawrence, and there's one that I'm going to finish off with just to try and see if I can make you angry, is I was driving along through the streets of Calgary. Within 5 blocks, there were 3 cannabis stores.
Yeah. Those are mine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Folks, if you're making money at these stores, how is it?
They're going to start competing with each other. Yeah?
Well, maybe that's what it is. Yeah. Standing on the street corner trying to hand something out just to try and get you in. Like, boy, and I don't want to make any comments, folks. Don't send your hate email too much, but if you're going to send it to Lawrence at thesqueakywheel.ca. But that, yes, I get it. There was alcohol stores, but boy, the fact that there is just as many cannabis stores now, it obviously is much more aware or popular than I'm familiar with.
When I was visiting my brother in Oliver, we went for coffee, and he was showing me the detachment he works at and stuff, and we drove by BC liquor stores. Right, and that's government-owned liquor stores, and right beside it was government BC-owned Bud Place.
Yeah.
Right, which I've never seen before. We don't have that in Alberta.
No, we don't have it that way. But I did drive by a co-op the other day, and there was a co-op cannabis. I'm like,
right, interesting.
So again, if there's money to be made and it's a business. Now let's frustrate you, Lawrence, with one last conversation that I want to have is the Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary has selected 4 Indigenous artists for representation in the nations of Treaty 7 and the Métis Nation Region 3 to bring a breadth of artistic experience in a mural onto Calgary's Foothills campus. Did anybody come talk to you? Because, when they talk about, we've had this conversation many times at a provincial level, at a municipal level, now at a school level, have they reached out and said, give us some input?
Well, I don't have our consultation coordinator here, but
okay.
She's the first point of contact. But definitely a question for Nicole if they brushed by when we're looking for artists.
Yeah, I'm hoping, because this sounds fabulous. And again, it's not that we oppose to any of these things. These are all
it's just,
great.
When they say Region 3 specifically, well, then that's this office.
Hopefully they've reached out to this office and said, here's something that we're doing. Yeah. Someday come and celebrate it or participate in it or become more aware of it because we want to share it.
That's right. Yeah. And it's never ever opposed to these things, but certainly when they say the name and they're putting it on paper.
Our office,
and they're getting money and support from a funder, thinking that they've checked off that box, well then, it becomes bit of an issue for sure.
Yeah, well, we'll find out more. But folks, make sure you check off that box when you're watching us on YouTube. Click that little red subscribe button. Listen to us on all the different platforms. Leighton always throws the information up for us. I can't say thank you enough for the people behind the scenes. Thank you, Lawrence, every week that we have our conversation. It's always fun for me. It's always learning. I will probably sneak these books out of the office as fast as okay. I won't leave those books out of the office. But folks, make sure you look for them. Continue to create that gathering, that awareness, the social connection. And again, always keep the wheel squeaking, folks. Send us all your comments, all your suggestions throughout this region, throughout this province, throughout Alberta, throughout Canada. Thank you from all of us. Keep the wheel squeaking. The Squeaky Wheel is brought to you by the Squeaky Wheel Company, co-hosted by the President, Lawrence Gervais, MMA Region 3, and the Captain, Ross Memphis Pambrun. Our program is broadcast from Calgary, in Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta, which is part of the historic Métis Nation homeland. We also acknowledge these lands are the traditional territories of Treaty 7, Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda, with whom we share this land on the basis of our historical and ongoing relationships. You can always reach us for comment about our programming by email at tsw@thesqueakywheel.ca or find us on our website, www.squeakywheel.ca, and our socials. For our comments, it is our focus to recognize all of our First Nations and Indigenous friends, share connection with Métis settlements, and listen to and show respect to our Métis brothers and sisters and families. Here at the Squeaky Wheel, we give thanks to our elders for their guidance and to Mother Earth for her time she allows us to be here and share her bounty. From all of us at the Squeaky Wheel, Tansi.